Hello and welcome everyone. Hope you can hear me. My name is Bence. I will be your host today at our webinar, where you can learn more about how iTMS and memoQ can help you do your job faster and what the two softwares can do together. At the beginning, let me do a bit of housekeeping. The session itself will be around 45 minutes. Then we will have a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A options of Zoom. You can find it in the Zoom panel. About our presenters, we will have two of them today. Tom Alwood is the CTO at Peter&Clark. And Jure Dernovsek is our solution engineer. Tom, Jure, hope you are here and can hear me. Let me pass the mic to you, Tom, if you are around.
Thanks for the introduction. I assume you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, there's always a problem on these webinars that things never go quite right and you can't hear or see. Thank you for the introduction. I'm the CTO at Peter&Clark, who've developed this tool called the iTMS. And I just want to open up first with a kind of introduction to what iTMS is, and then we'll go into our integration with memoQ, which has some differences, I think, than other system integrations with memoQ. So first thing maybe to clear up is some terminology. iTMS, Integrated Translation Management System, is a business side system for translation organizations, whether you're an LSP or a language department inside of an organization. You can use this application to manage your translation operations, both in terms of getting translations done, but also in terms of recording information about your clients or end users for the translations, your vendors or translators or other service providers. You can naturally record the financial information, both in terms of quoting the clients, as well as issuing out invoices to clients, as well as receiving in invoices for many external parties. Now, so that takes care of the business side of things. In terms of workflow, we have built in a certain degree of workflow that's file-based exchange. You can hand off a file to a translator and they can upload a completed file if they're using tools on their end. And in addition, we've integrated with memoQ as really the translation workflow component. Now, there's kind of changes in terminology in the industry these days. We call ourselves a TMS, a translation management system, and memoQ is also a TMS, although they do slightly different things. We're more of a business translation management system, and memoQ is more of a workflow translation management system, or what we traditionally may have called a CAT tool or a translation environment tool. But the two together mean that we have the full range of business functions of both translation memory, retention, and a working interface for translations, which we'll show you through memoQ, as well as managing all the business functions. The origin of the iTMS with Peter&Clark has to do with Peter&Clark's business. They are a LSP headquartered in Luxembourg. They're mostly focused on the financial industry, and focused on that industry meant that their clients had a very high degree of security requirements. So that meant every year having to fill out very long, very complicated security surveys from these companies. And when they were using other commercial translation management systems, those were not always meeting all the security requirements their end clients were demanding. So they decided to develop their own internal system based on a higher level of security built into it, as well as just to reflect what they thought would be some better and more convenient working aspects to the system, which they thought were clumsy in other tools. So we started development. System is based on the Symphony framework. And we built in a number of security aspects in it. Two-factor authentication is built in. We have things built in such as salted hashes for storing passwords securely. We have a DMZ separating the web interface from the databases. And then on top of these, we're also hosting the system on an Azure cloud server, which meets some of the industry's highest levels of security. So in terms of the financial industry, it meets SOC 2 requirements, it meets HIPAA, medical data security requirements, and a number of other, the ISO standards, so forth. So this allowed us to have a very secure platform that met our end clients' needs. Now, iTMS, the first word is integration. So one of our focuses has also been on integrating with other systems, with the philosophy that, if there are other systems out there that we can leverage to make our product better, we should do that. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. We like memoQ as a CAT tool, translation memory tool. So there's no need, from our perspective, to invent our own CAT tool. We would rather partner and integrate best-in-class tools rather than develop our own, if at all possible. And to further that integration, we've been working on APIs and other ways to integrate these tools into our platform. And that has largely meant integrating with client content management systems. So clients can automatically send us work over, which is something everyone loves. It reduces that need for exchanging emails and uploading and downloading files, and as well as integrating tools on our side. So we've integrated memoQ as a workflow tool. We've also integrated some other things like Abby Fine Reader for when we get projects that have a lot of scanned PDFs, we can OCR those. So those are kind of the integrations we're focusing on. Now, one other difference with iTMS, which is different from other commercial TMS, BMS solutions, is that we are a smaller user group of people who've purchased the system, although it does have lots of features, but we allow people who purchase the system to also fully customize the system. So we're not doing a multi-tenant SaaS solution where people can just log into a common application. We're actually doing more sort of a bespoke installation where it can still be done on a monthly charge. We can set you up on a cloud server of your own, and you can then actually hire us or even use your own developers to customize interface functionalities, add on new functionalities. So we have some of the other users in our group developing whole new functionalities, which then other users are interested, and they can work out how to some monetary arrangements for that to help defray the development costs. Certain functionalities like functionalities to help manage patent translations better, including the ability to manage filings and things like that. So we've got a small user group that's very interested in customizing the system. And that's a little different than some of the other commercial systems. I mean, we're not looking at being 10,000 users. We're looking at being a more dedicated small group who really want more of a customized system than a generic system. So that being said, I think I'll take you in, start to show you the system, and then show you our integration with MemoQ and what it can do. So I'm going to share my screen now. And you should be able to see my screen. I've logged in. I'm right here just at your first login dashboard, which shows you your activities and things you need to address immediately. And then you can see at the top a number of navigation items. So we have all the features you'd normally find in a TMS. We have an area where you can create quotes that you can send to clients. Naturally, we have an area where we can create and manage projects. We have a database where we can profile out our clients, an area where we can profile out all of our vendors, translators, interpreters, whatever kind of third parties you might want to engage with. We have an area where we can manage our invoicing activities for clients, as well as receive vendors' invoices and initiate payments with our financial systems. And also reporting functionalities, both client-facing on revenue as well as vendor-facing on spend and invoicing types of reporting. The system is also, of course, completely configurable. You can set it up with your own logos, define out your own color schemes for the interface. You can do things like define what type of number format you want, European style, US style, other styles. We have a ability to define how long you keep intermediate files to free up your database over time. Abilities to find out your own project numbering formats, whether it's sequential numbers or client abbreviation and date formats, likewise with invoicing. And also we can set up various business entities that you can operate under, which means that you can set up, if you have multiple offices and different locations, you can set up a different entity for each of those. You can even make them self-contained units. So if you have units in different countries, they can operate completely separately, and you can keep the finances separated, and even the personnel might only be able to see one entity's work. But we can also make it so you can view work for any entity. So if you have different practice groups, if you have an interpretation group separate from a translation group, you could set those up separately, and they can have more or less their own working environments. We also have usual abilities of defining out all your own lists, whether it's languages or the services you want to offer, what your tax, applicable tax rates are, a whole long list of these kind of drop-down menu values that you can fully tailor to your own needs. We also have the ability to define out cat tool settings of how you want to display various categories of matches. Different people use different tools, because we also have that ability to upload a log file in the system aside from any live integration with server-based cat tools. And you can decide on how you want to show those values. For example, we like to use a simplified scheme of putting fuzzy matches all into one category rather than to break them out as separate categories, just because for our clients, that's often more information than they want or need. But at the same time, we have the ability to create client-specific cat tool categories if they need it as well, because we have some clients who actually want a different breakdown, one that's unique to their own, or you can break it out according to the cat tool zone categories. We have the ability to define master pricing lists as well as client-specific pricing. And we can configure emails with default text in emails that can be sent to clients or to vendors and other things. So it is fully configurable from that point of view as well. Now, in a minute, I'm going to go through the process of creating a quote and then a project. I thought I'd first just show you the client and vendor databases. So these databases, we have search features that you can use. And within these, you could set up a record for a company. You can define out its industries, its addresses, all that, and then define the individual contact people at that company and their various roles. So somebody could be a manager role, somebody can be just a contact, and you can also grant them the ability to access their work through a client portal, which is of course a subset of data that they would see about any projects. They can submit projects, they can download completed files. There's an archive there, so they can always find their previously translated files and download as a resource. We can also, for the client, define out their pricing, any sort of agreements you have with them, you can upload. We can define out some default CAT settings, so those pull in for their projects. You can follow the project archive here. And there's also abilities to define out what we call invoicing entities, really different instructions on how invoices are to be routed. In some companies, they want it to be routed to the person requesting projects. Other companies have accounts payables department that you need to route it to. In our area of working in the financial industry, we have very complex invoicing routing requirements, because often in a large financial services company, we have to route an invoice to a specific fund within that company. So we can have clients that can literally have hundreds of different ways of routing invoices. So we need a flexible tool to record that. So you can record a lot of information about what taxes apply, what billing terms are. Do you have to have a PO included? Does invoicing have to be held for an end of month, monthly bill? Functions like that for us to track how we have to route invoices. Other thing in the client invoices, you can actually also have relationships between companies. So you can have parent companies and child companies. With a parent company could be a master record, and then national or other divisions of a company be separate records, and yet they can all be grouped together. You can run reports on the grouping as a whole as well. Our vendor database allows you to profile out vendors and all their information. It has some registration tracking. We also have a online vendor registration form that your vendor managers can direct new vendors to fill out. We can define out the services and languages a vendor uses, as well as any technology. We have a feedback process for assignments that an editor can review a translator's work and rate it, or project managers can do that. And that is a cumulative feedback function on that vendor. They can also see a history of all their assignments, invoicing information about how they like to be paid. And also we have a calendaring function, so vendors can see you can see what assignments they have issued to them, so you don't have overlapping assignments. And vendors can also see most of this information from their own portal login, where they can track where you may have a accounting contact where you have to exchange financial information. Okay, so that's just a quick view of the client and vendor database. So let's go in and create a quote and see some of the integration with MemoQ, because I'll use MemoQ to help create the quote. So I'm going to create a new quote. I'm going to select my client and my contact at that client. I'm going to give this a name, Project 5 May. Has some default information on the project manager, which picked up the customer's currency, in this case, Euro. And you'll see that this creation is a 4-step wizard that takes you through a number of steps to create. Next step is where we define out the files to be used in the project. And so I'm just going to take a file here and I'm just going to drop it here. I could also navigate and upload a file. This also is integrated with a client request form on the client portal where they can submit files and they show up here. But we have this box here, which we upload our original source files. At this point, we are going to create something called a file group. And a file group allows you to define the languages used on a project and then associate that file with it. You can actually associate multiple files with a file group and multiple language pairs with a file group. So if you have one file that's going into 3 languages, you can define out all the languages for it. Or if you have different files that need different schedules or need to be managed by different people, you can create separate file groups. So it's just a flexible tool to allow you to define out the requirements for your files in terms of workflow later on. I'm going to define out my document type on this just so we can track our statistics. And I'm going to save my file group. So now I have one file, which I can see here, going English into French. Now at this point, you could see I have a button for get word count with the MemoQ logo. So that is our way of connecting with MemoQ when we want to send over a file. Now, we can connect with MemoQ as either a MemoQ instance installed on your own servers, which is what we do. We actually have the iTMS hosted on an Azure cloud server. Then we have a separate Azure cloud instance where we are self-hosting MemoQ, and they're connected directly that way. That is for our own purposes for greater security, but we can also connect with MemoQ Cloud without problems. So you can have, you can choose to actually use the MemoQ Cloud service as well, and it connects in just the same way. Now, at this point, I can choose some MemoQ settings. Now, in this client, I had to find out a set of settings for French financial work, and I can choose that. I define that out in the client, and it automatically pulls in the translation memories I want to use on this project. But I could also instead pull in a MemoQ project template. So if I had defined out a specific project template for this client in MemoQ, I can also pull that in, and that can tell me what translation memories or term bases are associated with that client, file filters for importation of certain types of files, all the things you might want to do with a MemoQ project template. You can bring that in here. You can also manually associate term bases or additional translation memories here. So you can do work that's on the fly that isn't predefined in either project template or your own internal settings. And also you can use filters, bring in a specific MemoQ file filter. And we have a few other basic MemoQ functions. Homogeneity in the analysis results include skeleton to allow vendor to export files from MemoQ and include preview files. So we have some basic functions here. we keep this pretty basic because it's meant to handle the majority of the work, which can be defined through these options. And later, I'm going to show you our other memoQ option, which allows you to do more complex memoQ functions and work with iTMS. So I'm going to submit this. This is now sending the data about the project and the TMs associated and the file over to memoQ. It is setting up a memoQ project, and it's going to run an analysis against that file. And in a second here, it'll come back. Here it is. You'll now see I've got a quantity showing up here. I can click on that. It's going to show me I've got some fuzzy matches in this project, a bunch of exact matches, no new words and no repetitions. And I can see the full breakdown from memoQ and breakdown by file too. So if I had multiple files in here, I'd have a separate analysis table for each of the files as well as the complete file. I can also download this as an HTML file if I want it offline for any reason. Okay, so now I have my quantities, my TM matches defined. I could also, if I had any reference files to include in this project, I can upload additional reference files. I could also upload additional source files if I need to. But now I can go on to the next step. Now I'm going to define out my services and pricing for the client. I'm going to add a service line. This project is going to be a translation. I can see here that my word counts have pulled in from the memoQ analysis, and I've also pulled in some client-specific pricing. And I can say this is a very small job, 65 or 66 euro. I can also tell this person, you know, a standard turnaround on this size is going to be a 3 to 4 day turnaround. We're in no hurry. I can define an anticipated start date and when an expected due date is around that turnaround. I can also tell them it's business day, turnaround, or calendar day if I need to. The other thing I can do here in the quote is add a scenario, by which I mean we can define out one set of pricing. This one, in terms of label, is a standard turnaround scenario. But let's say a client has actually asked if we can show them pricing based both on standard turnaround, but also on a rush turnaround. So at this point, I can add an adjustment, and I can choose that it's a super rush. I have this defined by default as an extra 50%. I can load that information. That'll calculate out that it's going to be an extra 33 euro. And I can tell them that this is a 1 to 2 day turnaround. And I've indicated this is a super rush turnaround. And I can present the client with both these scenarios. I can present them in a document as a PDF, but also through the vendor or through the client portal. The client is going to be able to look at this information, and they're going to decide which scenario they want to go with. They can only choose one of the two here, but they could decide, okay, I'm fine with a standard turnaround on this, or I'm willing to pay the extra money to do a rush. So you can allow a client to make a comparison pricing based on the level of service. I can actually add additional scenarios, as many as it's needed. Sometimes clients have complex number of files and they want to know what it's going to cost to have some group translated before other files and with different services mixed in. So you can make a very complex array of services. For example, I could also say here that the client is also asking for DTP services. They want this to be laid out nicely. So I can add an additional service item. So I can list out all the different services I need with different types of pricing units. So hours, days, however you need to price. These are all items you can define in the configuration area. So I've defined out two scenarios here. I'm going to go to the next step in the wizard. I can include a message to the client if I want. If I had received this order by email, I can also paste in here for future reference any instructions they may give. This way, when the job potentially goes live, that's handed off to the production team and the project managers. I can now go to the review screen. This is a screen where I can see that information I've put in. I can review the two scenarios. I have my standard scenario here with a total price of €66. I have a rush scenario here, which is 143. If I am pleased with both those services, I can now decide I can release those to the portal. That means the client can now see that on the portal. They would also receive an email notification. I can also now decide to generate out a PDF version of that. So I can decide the language. In our case, we have it set up. We can generate out invoices in English for the UK, French and German, but you can also add additional languages if you want. And also some options on how you want quantities to show. Do you want to show the breakdown of all the rates, or do you want to show them just a complete total? So I'm going to save that. I've now generated out a PDF here. I can actually download this if I want to review it. I can see my laid out. Of course, the layout can be customized. We have our terms and agreements included here also. If I review that and I'm satisfied with it, I can actually from here also initiate an email to the client, which has some default text. And I can save it, submit, and that sends out the email to the client along with that PDF attached to it. And in addition, they can access this on their portal. Now, the client can then go onto their portal and decide to accept or reject your quote, or they can telephone you or email you and say, yeah, this looks good, I want to go ahead. So I'm going to just say that clients called me, and I'm going to say I'm going to improve this standard turnaround. So this is going to convert that quote into a project. So I'm going to acknowledge I'm going to be the project manager, the date started. I'm going to fill in the due date for the project. And I'm also going to choose a workflow. In this case, I'm going to choose one of the MemoQ workflows, predefined workflows. You can also change the workflows once the project's live and define your own. I'm going to choose a MemoQ workflow with pre-translation. I'm going to submit this. Yeah, so maybe I click the button. There we go. So now I've created my project. I can see I've got a flag up here that this is a MemoQ connected project. So I always know that in this case, I'm working on a project that is utilizing MemoQ. In MemoQ, let me refresh this view. It has sent over this project. It is now set up in MemoQ. It will have the translation memories associated with it and any other data I sent over. I can also see it has set up MemoQ working tasks for me. So here I have a service defined for the client. And then within that service, I have this broken down into a number of steps corresponding to the MemoQ workflow. So a translator step, a reviewer 1 step, and a reviewer 2 step. I can tell these are MemoQ steps because the MemoQ logo icon, the Q icon is showing up here, so I know these are MemoQ, because I could also add additional tasks to this project that are not MemoQ related. For example, if I want to do a final proofread of the project after all the MemoQ steps are done, just on the target language file, I can do that as a non-MemoQ step, as just proofreading the straight resulting Word file. In this case, we're going with a MemoQ workflow. I can also see here, oops, I have an extra job. I don't need that. I can just remove that. I can also see a financial summary here. I can see, so far I have no vendor costs because I have assigned no vendors, but I can track on my project gross profitability. At any time that I need to, I can edit the financial information on this if additional services need to be added. And at any time, I can also indicate that the service to the client can be marked as okay to bill, meaning you can initiate the invoicing process. That can be at the end of a project when everything's done and your project manager signed off, or it could be done up front if you need to invoice a client at an earlier stage. I also have a traffic feature here, which will show me as the project goes on all the system activity on a project, as well as any notes I want to create about the project. Right now, we're very early on in the project, so the only thing that's happened is we've opened up the project. So I record a date here, but every time I make an assignment to a vendor, it records when that was sent, as well as when the vendor accepted the assignment. So I can have a full chronological history. I can also add user-defined entries, for example, handover notes. If one project manager is going to pick up a project from another project manager, they can have notes for that. There's also a feedback function from the client. So you can also invite a client to give you feedback on the performance of a specific project, and that information will be recorded in the project for any quality control follow-up you might want to do. So let's look at assigning a vendor to the specific task. So you can see here I have available the original source file, and I can download this. When we assign this to a vendor, the vendor will also be able to download that original source file should they want to be able to look at it or reference it, both when accepting an assignment and as they work. Now, I can click on Assign Vendor. I know I want to have this back by the 30th, and I'm going to search for vendors who may meet my requirements. So right now, I'm showing no one does, but if I update this to change the subject, I can see that Jure has this language pair and also uses MemoQ on this project. I can tell he also uses MemoQ because he has the MemoQ logo included next to his name. Now, his name is showing up yellow because he actually has other assignments going on, and I can see what other assignments he has going on right now to help me judge if he could take on any additional work. In this case, I went ahead and just assigned him because I know he could handle the additional labor. And this is looking at his other PO that I clicked on in his calendar, so I could see the details of that assignment. But let me go back here, find Jure again. I'm now going to assign him to this project, the small project. I can give him instructions. And I could also ask him to do a feedback on a previous step. This is the first step in the workflow, so he wouldn't be able to do that. But if he was the editor or the reviewer one on this assignment, I could ask the reviewer one to also give feedback on his performance. I'm going to save that. I can now send an email to the vendor, which will inform him that he has this assignment. And Yuri, you should now have received an email if you would like to switch over to your view of showing it what it looks like from the translator's point of view.
Absolutely. So thank you, Tom. Let me then share the screen. I did receive the task. So still waiting for the email, but let me show you then how it looks like from the translator's point of view. So can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Now, most of you probably know memoQ, so I would like to show you how does it look like from the vendor perspective, and I believe now I also received the email. Let me just quickly check. So I'll paste the screen. Yes, so I got the email. Let me then show you that one. Okay, so this is how the email will look like. We can also download the pictures. So we will see here the PO and the instructions which guide us to the portal. And here we could already accept or reject the job if we see that we can take it or not. And if I show you now the portal, so if we log in here, we will then here see this task, which we can then view. And in this section, yeah, we have an overview, which is really nice. We can download the PO again. We can download the files, and if we want to work on the job, we can here accept or reject it. So for today, we'll accept it. So it does seem manageable. And now, because this confirmation also triggered the project to be assigned to me. Now we have also received an additional email from memoQ telling us that we can now work on the file. So
and Yuri,
yes,
if you just scroll down a little, maybe. So you'll see when Yuri accepted the assignment, that sent information from iTMS to memoQ, assigning Jure as the translator on the file. And that generated a memoQ web translation link, which is now presented here. Now, so Jure will have a choice here. He can either work through memoQ's web translator interface, which we actually like. It's gotten very strong over the last few years of having a full range of functions for the translator to use. But Jure would also have the option, if he is a strong memoQ user and has memoQ client installed on his computer, he can also link to our server and pull down that project as a local project. So he can either work through the web interface, or he can work in his own local memoQ, having checked out the project. So he has a choice of how he wants to work as a memoQ user. So it allows us to both use vendors who are power memoQ users, but also work with external translators who may not be as familiar with memoQ, but memoQ Web's interface is quite user-friendly and intuitive. So many of them do not have any problem using it. And of course, they've got a full range of tools here available for them, and they can translate away, and they don't have to buy any software licenses, because I can also use vendors who don't normally use CAT tools. Sorry, Jure, if you want to.
Yeah, just and thank you, Tom. So actually, that's what we are seeing here is the browser. What we could see here is the client interface. I wanted to just mention when we have logged in, Tom mentioned security, and if in case you're working in the, let's say, regulated industry, or your IT requirements are on security are demanding, let's say, then what we can also do is support you in that sense. So we also offer two-factor authentication for login. If you're opting hosting, then we also complement iTMS's offering. So you also can use Azure's single tenant environments. And one other factor, some clients which are really, I could say, maybe even paranoid about security, they could even disable the client. So in case you do not want that anybody would download the files here, you can actually, download the files from the client or work from the client. Then you can actually just let the users work in the browser. But usually the use case is that the browser interface is simplified, meant for intermediate users or beginner users, or maybe not linguists at all, subject matter experts, in-country reviewers. They will be able to work here, provide feedback using track changes, using comments, even discussions if you allow that, but have really a wide range of features that then support the linguists. Now, this translation, Tom, I'll have to we have the translation.
Yeah.
So the numbers, okay, we see here we have the numbers, we have to then adapt them. Now, I will not do that because what I wanted to, what you can do is you can also then, if you want, that was already enabled, but if you would, for instance, do here a mistake, let's say, then there will be a lightning showing us we have an issue here. So in such translations, that can easily happen, and the variety of things that we can configure when it comes to quality assurance is pretty broad. So terminology consistency can be checked, numbers can be checked, even orders, spacing between numbers and percentage can be checked, length can be checked. In regulatory industry, style guides can be converted to quality assurance checks, terminology can be asset proofed. So really a wide range of things can be done. So now I'll just here complete the translation and then hand it over to you, Tom. I would just like to show you here, if in the browser, you don't have to do anything. If something crashes all of a sudden, the most what can happen is that you will lose maybe one translation. Now, if I go back here, so the synchronization will happen periodically. So if you, of course, do not switch that off, so you will see the translations appearing after, let's say, a confirmation, or depending on when you have set up the frequency. So you see we have here the new translations appearing, and now we could continue working here. So you can even have a mixed scenario where, let's say, a translator works in the client, a reviewer works in the browser. They will be able to see each other's translations. So that is the difference. So the client is a full-fledged solution, offers pretty much everything that the translator and reviewer need, but the browser interface is simplified, and it also has an effect on the pricing. So if you are looking for a, let's say, price performance solution, then the browser can be also a good compromise for you, may fit the scope. So here what we will do is go through the document. As you can see, it was pre-translated, so you can configure those settings in the template. And now, once we are done with that, we can easily send the file back to the project manager or to the next person in line by simply clicking on this deliver button. And here the document will be checked for integrity. If there are no serious issues, it will be passed on to the next person. And if the project manager decides there are some critical issues to be checked, they will have to be checked before delivery. So you really have control over quality if it matters. And collaboration possibilities, here we see one document assigned to one user, but if you would want to, you could also let several people work on the document together. Now, to wrap it up from my end, I would just like to show you here the vendor portal, because the emphasis today is on iTMS. So what we see here is the project overview. We would also then see here our invoicing. So this is what the vendors can do: create invoices. But what I found particularly interesting, so my info is also of course valuable, is good. So we see here our breakdown. We could then edit this information. Proficiency still okay, decent, good to hear. But also this calendar, here you can easily then book your working times, add holidays as mentioned. You would see here an overview. So this is really a great feature. So easy to use, yeah, really quick onboarding. So if you're looking for a quick solution for vendors, this is really great, and let them work in the browser because it's simplified. Let's say 10 shortcuts gets you really far. Like I would say 80% of the work can be covered with 8 to 10 shortcuts. And yeah, fast onboarding, simple and efficient and secure, and yeah, just great. So that would be it. Tom, I will be now passing on to you because you still have some nice features to present. Yes. So let me stop sharing and thank you.
Okay. So I will share. So back in that project, Jure completed his translation. He confirmed all the segments and delivered the MemoQ file back. I can now see here in the project that this is a delivered and approved. It has also exported out a target version of his files. So even if I wanted to do a quick QA check, I can actually have download that and review it. We also have the ability, if there is a problem, to revert the assignment back to Jure if there's corrective action needs to be taken. So we can also have recursive workflows. All right, so that would be a vendor working with MemoQ in what we'll call a forward integration, where we create a project in iTMS and send it over to MemoQ for the workflow steps. In this scenario, it could continue through the reviewer steps, or if this was the only MemoQ step, it could end the MemoQ project now and do manual workflows. Now, we have another type of integration with MemoQ, which is the one that's a little more unusual, which we call QLink. And what this basically does is allow us to create a project in MemoQ and link it back to iTMS. As I showed you when I initially did the setup for MemoQ for the test project, we had fairly basic options. You can do a lot with the MemoQ project templates, selecting TMs and so, but there's a lot of very complex functionality in MemoQ, which doesn't always make a whole lot of sense for a TMS to build into their interface because it's not used on a regular basis and is more sort of for one-off projects or very complex projects. And in that case, it makes sense to go into MemoQ and import a file. And on import, you might want to make a number of different options. For example, if you have been sent a complex Excel spreadsheet from your client, and the client only needs certain worksheets or specific cell ranges to be translated, MemoQ has really complex tools to allow you to select just the content you need to be translated. Or for a PowerPoint presentation, if the client also wants all the speaker notes translated. When importing that, directly through MemoQ, you can set those parameters to include that on import. So it has some very nice, very specific functionalities. Also, if you had XML files, you need certain attribute fields exposed for translation. It has filters to allow you to do that. So really complex functions in MemoQ, which we use occasionally and had the need to use those in MemoQ, but we also want to capture that data in iTMS. So we can create a project in MemoQ and then have this Q-link functionality, which then allows us to bring that information into iTMS, both in terms of word counts for invoicing purposes, so we can have all the statistics on a project. We can actually then define the vendors in iTMS and then send that over to the linked MemoQ project. So we can still control issuing POs to the vendor and leverage the MemoQ. So having this backwards integration from MemoQ to iTMS saved us a lot of time, because we were setting up a lot of projects in MemoQ and then having to manually create projects in iTMS. So we just decided the MemoQ APIs allow this. Let's do it and do that. The other thing this is useful for is we have also leveraged MemoQ's built-in compatibility and connectors for various client CMS systems, for example. MemoQ comes already with the ability to connect to a number of big CMS systems, as well as their own sets of APIs, and which can be tailored to any systems, as well as MemoQ's content connector feature, which is a hot FTP system, which allows clients to upload files to an FTP, which then can come into MemoQ as a MemoQ project. We've been using those functions for years, even though before we developed all of iTMS. And we wanted to continue using that because it was really useful for our clients. So for example, Peter&Clark has some clients who do daily feeds of documents. It's a constant stream. They send over separate projects of XML files, are often quite small, and it's 30, 40 a day. And they only want to really manage that bill for that as once a month. So we can set up a master project and constantly get the feed that's coming into MemoQ into an iTMS project. And we can also have the ability to take multiple projects created in MemoQ and link them into one project in iTMS. So this feed of small work that comes in every day, we can take all of those files, often less than 100 words each, and all included into one MemoQ or one iTMS project from MemoQ. We also have some abilities to filter if we're looking for work for specific clients, or even just projects that have all the same language pairs. We can give this a new name to combine all the names of the project. We can assign this to a client. We can give the project a deadline. We could, give a PO number from the client. We can define out a number of different parameters. We can save and submit this. So I've got 3 projects from MemoQ. I've now combined into one. It had 3 separate files. I can see that this particular project all had the same language pairs, English into German, but we could also bring in files that had multiple different language pairs. iTMS can actually handle projects with different source languages. You're not restricted to having a project only reflect one source language. MemoQ does need to have each MemoQ project have one source language with possibility of multiple targets, but you can actually create an iTMS project that has different source languages for the files, because that's sometimes clients demand that. And what happens then is we can actually create those in iTMS or memoQ, and it'll be linked to more than one memoQ project. So we could have a client send us a request that's English into French and French into English with different files. We would set that up in iTMS and have it linked to 2 different memoQ projects. In this case, it's one language pair, English into German. I can see that. I can also see some metadata around the file by rolling over it. I can see which memoQ project it's come from, its language pairs. I can also see the abbreviation here, which helps a project manager if there's multilingual project, if there were French and German files in this project. Of course, they want to create a file group that would reflect each language group. At this point, I can add a file group. It's predefined from the languages because that came in from memoQ. I could assign all of these files to this. I can give it a document type, and I can save that. I've brought in the files. I can actually now get the word count. It's got a linked TM here. I can get the word count of all 3 files and figure out how I want to assign that. And then I can go through the steps I did before with the costs, finding out the costs, and I have my project due date already defined. I don't need to record a message, and I can, from here, generate out my memoQ workflow. So now I could assign what were 3 different files in 3 different memoQ projects, all to the same vendor, or I could create different file groups if I want to assign different groups of files to different vendors and create separate tasks for each of those vendors with a different file group. So I have the flexibility, if I'm getting lots of files in, to split it up between different translators, different reviewers, or have multiple translators feeding into one reviewer, and all that information will then be recorded in memoQ as well. So it allows for us to have a full backwards and forwards integration with memoQ. Okay, I see where we've gone over a bit. So I think that is the material we'll cover today, really focusing on the memoQ integration.